Well, thank you for coming. All of you were able to make it this morning. My name is Lane Stonewall, and this is Active Teaching Lab for April 3rd. And so just to kind of give you a kind of a synopsis of what's going on before we can move on to our speaker. Again, this week we're going to be using Zoom for those of you who are online and are watching. So again, thank you for that feedback. The online evaluations and the APR evaluations were really helpful in helping us kind of get technology that would be most useful for you. So please keep those evaluations coming. They really help us make this better. Again, if you have questions either online or in face-to-face, please feel free to reach out to Kathy Binkowski. She's sitting up front with a little name tag that says Kathy, which is quite appropriate given that's her name. If you're in-house, feel free to raise your hand or just kind of tap her on the shoulder, or you can go on YouTube as well. We'd be happy to answer your questions online. Just to be aware of you, those of you who are online, there's a 10-second delay, so just give her a little bit of patience when she's talking with you. So, all right. We also have a course for Active Teaching Lab. So if you haven't been to Active Teaching Lab before, there's some instructions on the handout there for you. And we are going to have a little in-class activity. We're going to have a pop quiz today. So we're going to have you take that quiz, and then we'll talk about the results of that quiz later on. So if you haven't signed up already, just to be aware that there are instructions for signing up on the little handout right here in front of you. It's the top experiment, enroll in the Active Teaching Lab course site. We're on YouTube as well, so in case you missed today or you missed another lab, they're all on YouTube, so feel free to check those out and to check out other ones. And so today, I didn't update the slides. That was last week's presenter. I'm very sorry about that, Michael. Today, I'm very happy to have Michael Newman present today. He is a professor and chair of the Journalism, Advertising, and Media Studies Department. I had to look at my notes to get every single one in there. And in the College of Letters Sciences here at UW-Milwaukee. He has his PhD at UW-Madison and has an active research interest in American cinema, television, and video games. And he is also a dedicated instructor and teaches a wide variety of courses exploring media studies. And today he's going to talk to us about his use of quizzes as a learning tool within his courses. So thank you very much, Michael. Please feel free to come on up.
Thank you for that nice introduction. Thank you all for coming. Thank you for having me here. I came today to talk about something I've been doing in a large lecture class. The class is called Introduction to Mass Media, or JAMS 101, Journalism, Advertising, and Media Studies. It's a GER class that satisfies the social science GER. It gets between 100 and 250 students per semester, depending on how many TAs we have and what the demand is. And it has the typical components of lecture discussion each week. So there's 2 50-minute lectures and 1 50-minute discussion section with TAs who lead those. And I've been teaching this class some semesters consistently for 11 or 12 years. And it never occurred to me that I would take attendance in a large lecture class initially. It wasn't something I had experienced as a student. I always thought there would be attendance in the small discussion sections, especially because if the point of the discussions is for the students to be engaging with one another and half of them aren't there, they can't learn as much. So I've always had the TAs take attendance and made that count, but I never thought I had a tool for doing attendance in the large lecture. And over time, I thought maybe I would do that. I'd heard about clickers as one way, and I wanted to explore that possibility. And I wasn't convinced that clickers was going to be the way, but I did come in and talk to Lane here and get some advice about it. The clickers would be a way to take attendance because the students can check in using them, but they cost money for the students in the first place. And I thought maybe if I were using them for an additional purpose, for doing polls or other active learning activities in class, it might seem worthwhile. But I didn't really have a plan for doing that. I was interested in exploring it, but I wasn't ready to pull the trigger on that. So I was looking for alternatives. And I should say what we're looking at on the screen right now, in case it's unclear, is a module in Canvas from my course. This is actually from last week. I think you know that what I'm going to be talking about is taking a quiz in the lecture using Canvas as a way not just to take attendance, but also as a tool for engaging the students and measuring their engagement and encouraging them to pay attention. And I've been doing this now for 1.5 semesters, and I like it. I think it's working well. I think it is incentivizing attendance, which is what I was hoping to do in the first place. And I'll talk a little bit about the ins and outs of how I'm doing it. So what we see here in this module is the reading for the week. I post my lecture slides. We see 327 attendance quiz, which was attendance quiz last week on Wednesday. And I would not publish that in advance. So this would stay unpublished until the beginning of class. So the students wouldn't know when there was going to be an attendance quiz beforehand or not. I thought when I heard about Canvas that this could be something I could use in the classroom. I think I had the idea that these tools like D2L or Canvas would be something the students would use if they're taking an online class, certainly, or they could support a face-to-face class by not just housing the course content, but also by being a place they can take exams. I prefer to give quizzes online than to give them face-to-face. I think it offers flexibility and less stress, etc. And I'd heard that Canvas has a good app for the students to use on a mobile device. I know there's a lot of debate about whether students should be using devices in the classroom. And I personally don't like making a lot of rules and regulations about what my students can do or not do. And I think that computers and phones, for that matter, can be distractions, but they can also be useful. Sometimes I ask students to look things up. If someone asks a question, I don't know the answer, I can say, well, I'm going to look it up on Wikipedia after class, or you could just do that right now and tell us what the answer is. So I like the idea that if they're going to have these devices, they won't just be shopping or checking the scores of the games or whatever, that they could be using them to engage in class. So I thought that the phones, especially if there's a good way for them to take a quiz using a phone, that could be something that would be part of taking attendance, but also could engage them. When I first thought about using Canvas, I noticed that Canvas has graded surveys, and I thought, well, I could just use a graded survey, and they go into Canvas, and the survey could be like, are you here? And they're like, yeah, we're here, and they get credit for that. But I talked this over with Layton before the semester began, and I got very good advice about making this more than just attendance. I had an opportunity here to do something better than that. So I created these 2-question quizzes, and I never announced them in advance. They're based on what I've just been lecturing about. So there's no surprise there. And I want all the students to get 2 out of 2 on these quizzes. These are the frequent low stakes assignments that I've been hearing about that's good for helping students engage regularly with learning and not have a ton of stress over everything coming down to one test. And I'm never surprised by this kind of thing, but there's never 100% of the students getting 2 out of 2 on these quizzes. The average might be 90 on these quizzes, so most of them are getting at least 1. I think some of them aren't paying attention. Some of them are confused by the question. Some of them might have just had a moment. Whatever happens, they don't all always get 2 out of 2. But that's my idea. There are going to be at least 1 a week during the semester. And altogether, all of these attendance quizzes are worth 5% of the final grade. At the end, I'm going to drop all but the top 10. So at the most, the quiz is going to count for half of 1% of your final grade. So that is a low stakes assignment. And if you happen to be absent, or if you didn't get 2 out of 2 because you were not paying attention or goofed, then it shouldn't matter because you can get 2 out of 2 on the other 10 that you're going to take during the semester. I was also very cognizant that there are some students who may not have a device that they can use to take a quiz in class, or that the phone might run out of battery, or might be having trouble connecting to the Wi-Fi or whatever else. So I knew, because I've read about how technology is not equally distributed among all students, that I would want to have an alternative to that. So that's why I carry this deck of note cards around. And when I give the quiz, I say you can take the quiz using Canvas. You can go online right now in the Canvas app, and the vast majority of the students take it that way. But especially in the beginning of the semester, I say, well, I always say this, but especially in the beginning of the semester, this is an option that the students are more likely to take. You can also take the quiz on a piece of paper. So raise your hand. TAs are walking around the classroom. Take a note card, write your name and your TA's name and section number, at least one of those two things so that we can direct the note card in the right direction. And I show the quiz questions on the screen as well as on Canvas. I show each of them twice. The first time I do this, I take a little bit of extra time. Sometimes I do this after 5 or 10 minutes of class to test. Did they pay attention the first 5 or 10 minutes? Sometimes I do it in the middle, sometimes I do it at the end. I don't announce it in advance. So this is what it looks like here, the attendance quiz. I'm just going to show you, this is like a little excerpt from last week's lecture. The topic was press freedom, and I talked about the First Amendment in class that day. And this is one that I did closer to the beginning of class. So I'm talking about the First Amendment, I read through the text of it, and I'm unpacking it by going bit by bit, talking about how the First Amendment protects us from our government curtailing our rights to free expression. So the state action is an important part, and I go through the expression part of the First Amendment, which some people think is one clause and some people think is two. Is it freedom of speech or of the press, meaning one freedom, or is it two? Is it the press as a technology or as an industry? What's the distinction between those things? This is just a typical lecture in an introductory media class, and I show them a picture of what a printing press would have looked like. And then I say, now we're going to have a quiz. You can take the quiz in Canvas, or if you want to take it on a note card, you could raise your hand. And there's always some students raising their hands. And then the next question is the first quiz question, which you can answer if you've been paying attention. After the first few weeks of the semester, I add the access code, and I'll show you that in Canvas in a moment. And I'll tell you what that does after I show you the two questions. So I show each of these questions twice. I show them each for, at first, maybe a minute each, and then it gets shorter. It doesn't take that long to answer these questions. And it's important that the students write down the answer, not just A, B, C, or D, but the actual word, because the answers in Canvas are shuffled. So they look different to different people. At the beginning of the semester, more students were taking the note card. I think they hadn't figured out Canvas that much. And actually in the fall, more students were taking the note card than now. So I think at the beginning of the semester, in a class of 140, you might figure more than 100 show up. And maybe about 10% were taking the quiz on paper, and now it's down to maybe half that. So there's really not that many students. And I'm trying to make it so that there's no sense of stigma about this. Like, it's not like, oh, you failed to have a device or whatever. If you prefer to take it that way, that's fine, take it that way. And it has not been onerous on the TAs, or at least they haven't reported to me that it is. So this is what the quiz looks like from my end. I can preview it here. This is how it looks to the student. They have 5 minutes to take it. And they choose the correct answer. The First Amendment explicitly protects freedom of speech or of the press. Who's prohibited from limiting freedoms? It's the state that can't limit them. And they get 2 out of 2. Inputting the questions. I can edit the questions this way. These are multiple choice questions.
How long does it take you usually to create a quiz like that?
How long does it take me to create a quiz like that? 5 to 10 minutes. It does not take long. No. And because I'm always working with the lecture materials, I'm not struggling to figure out what I want to ask. Actually, some lectures do lend themselves better to having a quiz like this. If I'm exploring a concept, it's harder to ask a question about the interpretation of a concept, let's say. It's easier to ask questions like these about very clear facts. So when I'm delivering information, better than discussing an example of a video or something like that. Depends kind of what we're talking about. If we look at quiz statistics, we can see that the average score on this one was 88, so pretty good. And there's a breakdown of how the students answered this question. So I can gauge from this if I have a bad question. Like if a lot of students are choosing an incorrect answer, maybe it's not such a good design, in my opinion, anyway. And then I'm going to go to show you what the access code is about, because that's one additional wrinkle that I added that I was happy with. So in a quiz in Canvas, you can require an access code, and I change these every time. The first few weeks of the semester, I didn't do this. That meant that the students were taking the quiz without having to enter the access code, so it's probably a little bit easier not to have to figure out that part of the process. I did this so that students who were at home would have a harder time taking the quiz. So they could take this quiz on Canvas at home. And I actually don't think that's such a terrible thing, because that means in order to do well in the quiz, they have to have looked at my lecture slides. And that encourages their learning, even if they're not in class. And they're not there, so they don't have the opportunity to be among their classmates who might ask questions. They can't ask questions. Actually, not that many of my students ever ask any questions anyway. But I'm happy with that, because it means that they're learning. But the purpose of this was to incentivize their attendance, because I think they learn better when they're in the room. So after I started using the access code, the number of students taking the quiz decreased. I don't have an exact statistic. I would say it probably decreased by around 10%.
We've got a question online. How many students are in this course, did you say?
140 are enrolled.
Okay.
And that actually varies by semester. In the spring, there's usually smaller enrollment than fall. So it's a class that tends to enroll well in fall. I think especially students in their first semester who know they want to major in my department's major, or looking to satisfy the GER, the social science GER. One more thing that I would mention is that I always have students leave after the quiz. And this is something that I find irritating, and I try to hide it as much as possible. But I tell the students, I'm always going to tell you something really good after the quiz. And it doesn't help. Some of them are there because I'm making them be there. And one or two or three of them will walk out. And I guess that's okay too. They've learned something. It's better than not learning anything at all. But that's one of the reasons why I vary whether the quiz is the beginning or the end or the middle. And there's always a student who missed the quiz and is upset about it, and I ask, can I make it up? And no, they can't. But if they come up to me at the end of class and say, like, I was in the bathroom, or my internet connection wasn't working, I always let them take the quiz at the end of class, just on a note card. So I guess I'll stop there and see what questions people have. That's what I've been doing in this class to get my students to be engaged and to actually be there.
This sounds really great, thing one, so thanks for this, because I do a lot of quizzing, and I've been doing note card questions in class, but I'm like really tired of having myself always record the note cards, so I'm like, oh, this is great. So what do you do? So you've done this quiz, and they've answered the question, and this percentage have got, then let's say that it was 15 minutes into the class, then what do? Do you talk about the answers?
Never.
Oh, okay, no. You just go on from there?
I just go on to my next point. Yeah,
okay.
I think that it should be obvious what the answers are. And I guess one more thing would be, they do have a discussion section later that week, sometimes later the same day. And that's not actually the only quiz they're taking that week. There's also a reading quiz based on that week's readings that they do discuss in section. So, for this week, there's also a reading quiz, and they're more likely to want to discuss this than they are to want to discuss the attendance quiz, which should have pretty obvious answers. Occasionally, I have a student come up to me and ask, what was the answer to that question? Because I got it wrong. And they're usually just kicking themselves, like, yeah, of course, that's the answer. So the content doesn't seem like something that needs to be like gone into in depth. There hasn't been any interest in that.
We have a question online. How do you deal with excused absences for athletes with these?
That's a great question. Athletes are the most conscientious students when it comes to their absences, because they come to you at the beginning of the semester with a list. They say, here's all the days I'm not going to be here. In my class, I haven't had that come up in any significant way, because their events tend to be on Fridays or on the weekend. I haven't had students missing a lot of classes on a Monday and Wednesday morning. There's not a lot of basketball games on Monday and Wednesday morning, or other events, I guess. So that's a situation I haven't had to figure out. But I have had students who were absent for really legitimate reasons, illness, family emergency, all of that. And I tell them that if they miss 1 or 2 of these, it won't affect them because there's going to be another 13 and only the top 10 count. But if they're absent a lot, then there's a bigger problem than just these quizzes. They're also likely to be struggling with other assignments. And I make them come see me and the TA, and we work on it. And I wouldn't want to penalize their grade significantly because of something beyond their control. But with this low stakes assignment that's so frequent, I haven't had students who were really frustrated because they missed more than 1 or 2 of them.
Thank you.
I have a question. You said your students were using the app, and have you gotten any feedback on how easy it was to use? On like, were they able to find it pretty easy? Were they able to download it? Did you get any comments on the app?
I haven't had much feedback about it. I also don't know how many are using the app and how many are just going to uwm.edu and figuring out how to get there. But I've heard that some are using it and that it's easy and they don't experience roadblocks in their way. It's kind of invisible to me, which I find interesting. When I'm giving a test the old-fashioned way, I pass out a sheet of paper, they write down answers, I collect them. But this way, I think it's mysterious. And it's kind of fascinating to me that this is going on without my knowing even what it looks like. Because I've never used this. I've used the teacher app maybe once just to see what it was, but I haven't used the student app. I could solicit feedback about it, but it's working, so.
If you have any complaints, that seems to be a good sign.
Right, and some of them are definitely taking it with a laptop computer.
Sure.
And I think the app is only for mobile devices.
Yeah. Yep. Any questions? I have one other one. Have you seen a jump in the number of students attending as a result of these quizzes? Or have you seen any like other correlating or perhaps correlating positive effects, like our quiz grades higher, our discussions better, or like, is there anything that you're seeing that like, hey, this is helping, this is kind of a cascading effect on my course?
I've noticed, and this is just by my observation, that attendance is better. There would be days in a class like this in the middle of the semester, this time of year in April, when it would be depressing to see so many empty seats in a large lecture hall. There were days, a few years ago when I was still giving exams the old-fashioned way, when I was astonished by how many students I had, because they were showing up to take the exam, and there would be all these seats filled that weren't ordinarily filled. And I don't see that anymore. I think that there's a consistent attendance. So I think it is having that effect, but I wasn't measuring attendance before, so this is based on my subjective sense of it. This is a 100 level class that's been designed so that students will succeed if they show up and pay attention and do their work on time. It isn't a really hard class. It has some hard parts to it. It has some hard readings. And you have to study to take the exams and do well on them. And some of the students fail them because they haven't prepared to take them. But this is a class that just rewards attention and effort and being present. And so this is just a way to help that along. And my subjective sense is that it's helping. I don't think it's a huge thing, but it's getting more people in the room in my observation.
Cool. Nice.
It's clear that you've thought really carefully about not only what you're doing with these quizzes, but why you're making the choices you're making. And so I'm curious how transparent you are with students about some of these decisions and kind of the quizzes being there to incentivize attendance and other aspects.
Well, I introduced the assignment that way at the beginning of the semester. And I say, these quizzes are going to be easy if you're here. The point of these is to give you an incentive to be here, and also for me to measure your engagement so that if there's something I need to spend more time on, I'll see. Of course, I'm not really going to see till the end of the lecture, so I'd have to come back the next day. And I don't repeat that very often. It's just a way of introducing it at the beginning. I assume the students think the reason we have these is to make me come to class. But it's more than just taking attendance, so they might also recognize that they have to also pay attention. And I think that's probably a benefit to them. I haven't asked them too much about it. And I have to say, sometimes it is a chore to work this into my lecture, and it seems interruptive. At the same time, I think it's hard for anyone to pay attention to one person talking for 50 minutes, and it's probably good to have some interruptions.
Something you said made me think of another question. Have you had an experience of looking over the quiz results and realizing, oh, here's a point that it seems a lot of people weren't getting, and so I should go back and address it further? Or has it mostly been confirmation, yep, they seem to be getting and understanding fine?
Yeah, there was one or two instances in the fall that I think I corrected for the spring, but I think it was hard for me to tell if it was a problem of the student's comprehension or a problem of the quiz question being less straightforward than it ought to be. I think that it's really hard to write good multiple choice questions, and it's not a skill that we appreciate enough. So especially in this kind of, it's not a high stakes setting, but it needs to be done quickly and needs to be efficient and work. So I think sometimes it's about a matter of the question design as much as it is the student engagement or comprehension.
Do you only do multiple choice, or do you ever do true, false, or anything else?
For these, I haven't done true, false. In my exams, so the exams, there's 2 for this class, have 35 questions like these, plus 1 essay question, and there's 2 per semester of these exams. And with those, I experimented with a lot of the different question formats, including multiple answer and fill in the blanks. And I found that I liked multiple answer, but those are harder. And I found fill in the blanks were annoying to me, because if I hadn't anticipated all the students' correct responses, then I had to go in and give them credit for them. So I don't like fill in the blanks. And true, false, I have used sometimes, and I've gotten away from it because I don't like the good odds the students have. And I think that they should be challenged a little more in college. I guess that's a bit of a personal bias.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Michael. Thank you for the great questions as well, everyone else.